All over social media, Heavenly Fans keto french fries are flooding feeds. This viral keto french fry video has people running to their kitchens to make them, and they're appropriately dubbed Heavenly Fries by her fans, and they're supposed to taste and look just like McDonald's french fries. So, of course, I had to try them and put my own keto taste buds to the test. And, of course, I had to try to make different variations of them, which most of them failed. But I am happy to report that we do have one winner. In all of my testing of Heavenly Fans recipes, I did pick out some common mistakes that people can make from making her recipes, and I wanted to show you how to avoid them. But first, let's talk about the base recipe. Heavenly Fan has two different variations on her website. French fries can be made out of almond flour, or you can use coconut flour. I only experimented with the almond flour version because I just don't really like the taste of coconut flour in things unless it's mixed in with some almond flour. But it is nice to know that there's a coconut flour version out there in case you do have a nut allergy. To start, we're gonna add 100 grams of almond flour to a bowl. When I measured it, it was roughly around 1/2 cup of almond flour plus 1/3 cup of almond flour. That's probably like the easiest way to measure it out. You're also gonna need 3 teaspoons of xanthan gum, which is the same as 1 tablespoon. The purpose of adding xanthan gum in this recipe or in any keto baked good recipe is to provide structure and support, so it's gonna hold that french fry together. So that's why she adds it in the recipe. Whisk everything together, and then we're gonna add 6 tablespoons of hot water and stir it until it forms a dough ball, and then she kneads it just to make sure that all the ingredients are combined. And then she'll let it rest for 15 minutes, covered. Now, I don't really understand why she says you need to let it rest. I think maybe she let it rest because it looked like maybe she added a little bit more water than I did, so her dough's a little bit stickier, so it kind of needed to dry out so that it was moldable and you could roll it out and you could cut it out into strips. But there's no like yeast in here, so there's really no need to let it rise or anything like that. So I don't really get what the purpose was. So actually, I did not let mine rest for 15 minutes and it still works just the same. Next, all you need to do is roll out the dough in between 2 sheets of parchment paper, and you want to roll it into a rectangle shape, and it needs to be around 1/4 inch thick. Now, the one thing that I will add about this recipe is that when I rolled these out, it kind of reminded me of a tortilla. In fact, one of the comments that I did notice on her video was that someone said that they used this recipe to make keto tortillas, and it completely worked. And really, that's no surprise because if you look at some of the keto tortilla recipes on the internet, it's very similar to this recipe for these french fries. Next, you cut the dough into strips. Now, this is where I made my first mistake. I used a pizza cutter to cut these, and I cut them way too thick. So when I tried to fry them or bake them, they actually turned out more like a crusty breadstick than a french fry. So I recommend using a knife and cut them into very, very thin strips. Although I must say in the video, she actually cut them into thicker strips, so I'm not quite sure mine turned out like that, but they did. But when I tried it a second time, cutting them thinner, that's when we had some success and they looked more like a french fry. Next, she says you can either fry them or bake them, and I tried both variations, plus I actually air fried them too. So I put them in my air fryer and let them bake. To fry them, she adds a generous amount of olive oil to the skillet, enough to cover the fries, and fries them over a low to medium heat. Now this is where I made my second mistake, and that was that I decided to use lard instead of olive oil to fry my french fries. And I used lard because I was thinking at the time, well, that's what McDonald's uses to fry their fries, but then now I'm realizing, no wait, they used tallow back in the day. That was what made their french fries so tasty, was that they cooked them in tallow, and I didn't have tallow, so that's why I went with the lard. But the lard didn't fry these as well as the olive oil did. It actually gave them a really strange flavor, so I don't recommend frying them in lard. Interesting point, my friends over at the Keto Twins, they made this same mistake. Click up here to watch their video on it. But they also fried them in lard and noticed the same thing with the flavor was just kind of off, and the way they fried up, it wasn't quite as what hers looked like in the video. Now, if you want to bake these, you spread them out onto a baking tray and spray them with some olive oil on top and bake at 400 degrees until they're golden brown. When I did this, it took around 12 minutes. I also tried to cook them in the air fryer, and with that, I placed them on my air fryer tray, again sprayed some oil on top, and then air fried them at 400 degrees for 6 minutes. I preferred the French fries when I cooked them in the oil compared to the other two variations. They were crispier, they tasted more like a French fry, and instead of the baked version and the air fried version was more like a toasted breadstick. Overall, I was very impressed with Heavenly Fry's recipe for keto French fries. They look like real French fries and the texture is the same too. The taste, on the other hand, is super close. You probably wouldn't be able to tell if you dipped them in like a sugar-free ketchup or ranch, but I feel like her recipe tasted kind of bland. Of course, it needed some salt, so I needed to add that, but I also felt like it lacked that potato flavor, so I wanted to see if I could mimic that. I wanted to experiment and see if I could come up with something better, so I tried a couple of different variations. So my first variation, I added a half a teaspoon of baking soda. Now, I played around with some baking soda before. Usually it's used in baked goods to help them rise up in the presence of an acid. So this recipe doesn't have an acid, so we don't really have to worry about it like levitating too much. But it is actually used in other recipes to help crisp things up. So I was thinking, well, maybe it'll help these get a little bit more crispier. Especially with my first version that I tried of her recipe where they were just thicker and they didn't really, it was more like a breadstick. It didn't crisp up like I thought I wanted it to. So I thought it would help with the crisp factor, but I was wrong. It did not make them crispier and it kind of gave them a strange taste, even though I only added like a half of a teaspoon in. So that was thrown out the window. Another variation was to try adding some protein powder. Now, I love the flavor of unflavored protein powder mixed with almond flour. It really gives it a good, it's just a really good base recipe for any sort of covering. Like I've used protein powder before for trying to make chicken crispy and it works really, really well. So I thought maybe this would work in this recipe to kind of crisp up the fries a little bit, adds a little bit more flavor to it. But the dough ended up being so sticky and puffy after I mixed it because I should have been thinking, this is the same dough I use for making my chicken and dumplings, which is delicious. You should click up here to try that recipe. And also my keto donuts. So if you want some keto donuts, click up here too and check out my donut playlist. But it's the same sort of concept where we're combining the almond flour and the protein powder, and like the combination of them, when you add some hot water, it actually puffs up your dough. So it created too sticky of a dough and I couldn't roll it out. It was hard to cut. So they made these really thick, crispy French fries, and it reminded me more of like a fish fry batter than a French fry. It was crispy and the texture was great, but the flavor and appearance was totally off. Then I decided I should really stop trying to mess with the crispiness and the texture and the appearance because they already look like a McDonald's French fries. I really just needed to tackle the flavor. So in order to enhance the flavor and make it more like a real authentic French fry, I decided to do a couple of things. So like I mentioned before, I felt like her recipe was a little bland because she didn't add any seasoning, which is fine. You can salt them afterwards, but to me that did not work. You really need to add the salt inside the batter. So I salted it. I tried 1/4 of a teaspoon at first. I still feel like that was not salty enough. It needs to be 1/2 of a teaspoon. And then to give them more of a potato flavor, I decided to look up some flavor extracts. So I went to my favorite flavor website that sells keto approved flavorings. It's one-on-one flavors. And I found that they have a mashed potato flavor extract. So I purchased that and then added that to my batter. So my third attempt at perfecting this amazing recipe from Heavenly Fan was to add more salt and then the potato extract. And I was blown away at how these tasted like real French fries. So not only do they have that crispy appearance and look like a French fry, but they also have the texture too and the flavor. So I got that third component that I was hoping for. Now that I have a pretty decent keto French fry recipe that I can use, I wanted to see if it could solve a pain point for many of us when it comes to making keto fries, is that they're amazing, but they take a lot of effort to make. I mean, whether it comes to this recipe or making like a daikon or a jicama based French fry, there's a lot of effort that goes into it. So I really don't make them unless I have a French fry craving or I'm trying to impress friends or family when they're over for like a potluck or barbecue. I really wanted to address that fact that I miss having French fries with my burgers, and I just want to be able to pull them out from the freezer, spread them on a sheet and bake them, or add them to the frying pan and fry them up at a moment's notice. So I decided to see if maybe this recipe freezes well. And guess what? It totally worked. You can meal prep up these keto French fries and pull them out when you want to have them, spread them out on your baking tray or pop them in the fryer and fry them up. And I think this recipe would work in an air fryer too, but the only thing you would probably have to do is actually fry them up ahead of time, flash freeze them, and then freeze them together in a plastic bag. And then you can pull them out and re-crisp them back up in your air fryer. And then it will be just like a regular frozen fry that's baked in an air fryer. Overall, I am amazed by this recipe and cannot believe I finally have an option for keto French fries. A big thanks to Heavenly Fan for this recipe, and who, by the way, she also makes a bunch of keto vegan recipes. So if you're vegan and you're keto, definitely check out her channel. Just click up here if you guys want to see it, or I'll have it listed down below in the description box. And also click on that description box for the full recipe. Make sure you guys subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed this content, and we'll see you next time in the kitchen.